Chapter 2. A hero's welcome is prepared. While the rest of the world calmed down a bit, knowing that there would be no further news from Professor Sherman until the full 5 days it would take him to cross the country by presidential train, San Francisco became wild with excitement. There have been many instances of a hometown giving its returning hero a rousing welcome, but never before had a returning hero placed so much attention on his hometown. San Francisco's reaction to this was to prepare for Professor Sherman the most fabulous celebration imaginable. Professor Sherman was a balloonist. San Francisco went balloon crazy. The railroad station was swathed in bunting, flags, and miniature balloons. The avenue from the railroad station to the Western American Explorers Club was lined with triumphant Corinthian columns, each surrounded by a brace of bright-colored miniature balloons. Ladies revived the balloon fashions and dresses, which had been popular in France 100 years before. Fat ladies gave up their diets. Everybody talked about that round look. Balloons were the decorative scheme in all the stores. In a fruit and vegetable store, for example, honeydew melons with a quart box of strawberries hanging from them by numerous strings were made to resemble ascension balloons and hung from the ceiling next to watermelon dirigibles and summer squash blimps. The mayor of San Francisco ordered and had the city pay for 1,000 miniature balloons to be used to decorate the avenue from the station to the club and the municipal buildings. He gave the contract for this big job to the Higgins Balloon Factory, thus honoring the workshop which built Professor Sherman's original giant balloon. These miniature balloons were made of silk filled with hydrogen and had a lifting pull of 60 pounds each. In an all-out effort of hard day and night work, the Higgins factory finished the balloons in 2.5 days. They were beautiful, painted many different colors, and shaped exactly like Professor Sherman's balloon, though considerably smaller. By noon of the third day, they were being attached to the various municipal buildings and along the avenue and looked very fine indeed. The workmen who were attaching the balloons were followed wherever they went by bands of curious children who asked many questions about the balloons, particularly concerning what would be done with them after the parade. When the workmen had finished, one boy carefully watched them walk off down the road, then climbed up on the roof of the post office, untied a balloon, and excitedly brought it down to the street. The boy weighed about 75 pounds. The balloon had a lifting power of 60 pounds. He wasn't strong enough to play around with it very much. As a matter of fact, all he seemed to be able to do was walk around, stretched quite tall on his tiptoes with his hands way above his head. Then he got an idea. He tied the end of the rope around his waist, ran down the street with the wind, and jumped as high as he could in the air. The balloon carried him about the height of a second-story window, and he floated down the street for half a block. This was fun. He tried it again. This time with a little more wind and a slightly bigger jump. He reached the height of a third-story window and flew a whole block. Of course, about 20 children chased him down the street, all yelling and wanting to try to make a few leaps. He jumped down a few more blocks, and by this time his arms were tired and his waist was sore, so he had to take a rest. He decided to let his younger brother have it next. His younger brother was quite a bit smaller and weighed 58 pounds. He grabbed the balloon as his brother wrapped the end of the rope around his middle. He took a little jump and sailed off very, very slowly down the block. "He's better than you are," yelled one of the boys. "Look, he's 4 stories high, and he's on his second block." Fortunately, there was a church at the end of the street, or the younger brother's leap might have turned out to be altogether too big. He managed to wrap his legs around the very top of the steeple, untie the balloon which shot upward into the skies, and grab the steeple with his arms and hang on as tight as he could. He was yelling and screaming for dear life. 10 minutes later, the fire department rescued the young boy, and the children decided to give up the balloon leap game. The fire department, by the way, was kept pretty busy all night. Sparks from chimneys would land on the small balloons along the triumphant avenue to the Explorers Club, causing them to blow up. There were no actual house fires. The balloon would flare up and disappear immediately, leaving no trace or fire. The resulting huge blazing flashes of light scared the people who lived nearby buildings so much that they complained to the mayor. The mayor ordered the fire department to station all of its trucks and engines along the avenue and keep a sharp lookout all night. This reassured the people who lived near the decorated buildings, and they gradually, family by family, went to bed and eventually fell asleep. What was in away, the funniest incident resulting from the mayor's plan to decorate parts of San Francisco with balloons caused considerable excitement some 200 miles away. It started in San Francisco. The mayor ordered workmen to decorate the cupola of the Western American Explorers Club with 10 alternating red and white balloons around its base, one larger blue balloon with white stars attached to its very top. The cupola of the club was an unusual piece of architecture. It wasn't actually in the original plans for the building. It was shaped like the upper half of the world, from the equator at its base to the North Pole at its peak. There was a flagpole at the pinnacle from which waved the American flag, and the Western American Explorers Club banner directly underneath. Maps of North America, Europe, and maps of everything north of the equator were painted with care in gold and blue paint on the cupola. This unusual cupola was made of wood and had been firmly attached to the building 23 years after the building was completed. It was added with reverence and ceremony, and it symbolized the club's greatest ambition to furnish the first expedition to plant the American flag at the heretofore unexplored North Pole. The 10 miniature balloons around the base of the cupola had a combined lifting power of 600 pounds. The larger balloon attached to its top had a lifting pull of 300 pounds. This made a total strain of 900 pounds. The cupola weighed a little over 400. Nothing unusual happened at first, but during the night, as the winds gently tossed the balloons back and forth, the cupola started to loosen somewhat like a tooth does. As night wore on, it became looser and looser. At 1:29 o'clock in the morning, it gently rose from its perch on the Explorers Club and, dropping bits of plaster, spikes, and rivets, flew off eastward over the city. It gained altitude and crossed mountaintops without incident. It started losing altitude only after having had a nice flight of 4.5 hours and landed silently and gracefully in a peaceful little Indian reservation, which was situated in a snug valley between two huge mountains. As dawn came up and daylight began to appear in this valley, the Indians rose, walked out of their tents, and beating their chests, took deep breaths of fresh air. But what was this? Right in the middle of the reservation, lined up with the other tents, was what appeared to be a small planet sunk in the ground and surrounded by smaller planets. Now, what do you suppose the Indians did? Did they back away trembling with fear? No. Did they shriek with fright? No. Did they beat up the medicine man? No. They gave the cupola an appraising look. Then one of them said, dumb white man decorate Explorers Club of San Francisco with too many balloons. Get hatchet. Cut door in United States between New York and San Francisco. This make good new house for chief. When the mayor gave the miniature balloon contract to the Higgins Balloon Factory, he was rewarding a company which was near to Professor Sherman's heart. This was a nice idea. However, the Tomes Aeronautical Studios, which were the San Francisco rivals to the Higgins factory, weren't at all pleased by his decision. At a time when San Francisco was balloon crazy, they found themselves to be sadly neglected. Something has to be done. Something unusual in the balloon line, said Joseph Tomes, the company's president. He immediately called a conference. The directors thought hard, did much scratching of their heads, and made many ridiculous suggestions, but were unable to come up or think of any satisfactory ideas on such short notice. Somebody suggested they look through their file of patents for some discarded invention of an earlier day. This seemed a good idea at such a pressing moment. After much study of all sorts of rare balloon inventions, they found a suggestion in a pocket of the files marked Ideas to be Considered. It quoted Benjamin Franklin in 1789, a year before he died. He was too sick at the time to stand the shocks and bumps of any form of travel. I wish I'd brought with me from France, Benjamin Franklin said, a balloon sufficiently large to rise me from the ground. In my malady, it would be the most easy carriage for me, being led by a string held by a man walking on the ground. That's it, shouted Joseph Tomes. Professor Sherman is sick. We shall build him a balloon carriage to carry him in comfort from the railroad station to the Explorers Club. The directors agreed that here was a wonderful idea. But it lacks grace and isn't imposing enough, suggested one of the directors, and besides, the mayor would never approve of a carriage in which there was no seat for him. The mayor could be the man who walks on the ground and pulls the strings, said Joseph Tomes, president of Tomes Aeronautical Studios. I do believe, the other director argued, that if we are to put on any sort of a show in this balloon-conscious parade, we will try to do something more spectacular than that. I'm only thinking out loud," he said in the manner of a man who is afraid of his own ideas. "But what do you think of this? We'll take a large, deep leather couch big enough to accommodate both the professor and the mayor. We'll raise this just off the ground with 2 of our number 3B touring balloons. To this comfortable floating couch, we will harness 3 horses in single file. A postilion in a balloonist suit will ride the front horse, thus directing our balloon buggy down the boulevard to the Explorers Club." "That's it!" shouted Joseph Tomes again. "A wonderful idea, and it won't take any time to build. We have the balloons in stock. The couch in my office will do nicely." He then instructed one of the directors to hire the horses and arrange some sort of harnessing so that the couch wouldn't tip. He instructed another to have 2 of the number 3B touring balloons filled with hydrogen and have the words, "Well done, Professor Sherman," painted on them. "This fabulous balloon buggy," said Joseph Tomes, "should be ready by 4 this afternoon, and I shall drive it at that time with the director who invented it to City Hall, where we will demonstrate it to the mayor. Good day, gentlemen." The meeting thus came to an end.